we become very preoccupied with how things should be because of our expectations of ourselves, when we use some other people as a mark of what is considered balanced, what is considered successful.
Hi there, I'm Bex Craig, and you're listening to the Not Just Anything podcast for women who want it whole. I hope you'll join me each week as we hear real stories from real women about how they've curated a whole life by design rather than by default. Today I'm talking to the ball of energy that is Sher-Li Torrey, who is the founder of Mums at Work and Career Navigators here in Singapore. Sher-Li started this business a decade ago with a desire to build a workplace that is flexible at the outset and places its employees at the centre. In our discussion today, Sher-Li shares some honest truths about her own experience as a mumpreneur and why 10 years on, she is still so energised by the purposeful work she is doing. I just want to say a huge welcome to Sher-Li Torrey for joining us today from Mums at Work. Sher-Li, thank you so much for taking some time to speak to me.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Rebecca. Nice to see you again.
Lovely to see you. Tell us a little bit about you, a bit about your story and what brings you here today.
Right. So I'm the founder of Mums at Work, and I am a mother of two children, 8 and 11. And the work that I do revolves around trying to support women, and in particular mothers who have taken a career break. They want to come back into work, or they want to start up a small business from home, or in certain cases, they just kind of want a different career path where they can kind of balance work and family. For me, it's always been about trying to create something where women are not penalized because they've chosen a different path for themselves. I started Mums at Work in 2010. And then in 2016, I started to recognize there were a lot of women who were not mothers, but who also stepped forward and said, I'm having the same challenge because I have to look after somebody at home who is sick. It could be a parent, it could be a spouse, it could be a sibling, right? But it's the same thing because of a personal choice I made to stop work or to take on less career duties. When I want to go back into full force, I'm challenged, right? So, and that's when I started Career Navigators as well. So actually, I run two businesses, and I run them actually from home most of the time. So it can be done.
Yeah, and I'd love to explore that a little bit. You are really on the forefront of the work from home kind of concept and have been doing this for a lot longer than the rest of us that are figuring it out as we go. I met Sher-Li about 5 years ago now, actually, when I was at LinkedIn and had the privilege of really seeing her in action and doing the great work that she does. But I guess I've always been a little curious about what the inspiration was for setting this organization up that is really doing such amazing work for women here in Singapore.
I won't lie, the inspiration, I became a mother. And actually, I think it's very interesting because when you feel the pain, like I think a lot of entrepreneurs do this, when something happens to you and you realize that, hey, I'm trying to go out there and find a resource for myself. And in my case was, I wanted a job that had more flexibility. And so in 2010, no one had heard about working from home, or it was a very unspoken concept in Singapore. And then I started looking, and people kept telling me, why don't you run a hobby business? And I thought, what on earth is a hobby business, right? So I did a bit of research, started looking up, and the more I looked up, I realized that, hey, there are flexible arrangements out there. There are companies that are probably very open to hiring women who have taken a career break or are just interested in different type of work arrangements. So with that, I said, why not this? Since everyone's suggesting to me to start a hobby business, and I cannot sing, I cannot dance, I cannot, I don't have craft talent. So why don't I try this out and see how that goes? And so that's how it was born. I mean, I wish there was a more fancy story to this, but the truth is, because of my own struggles of trying to find something like that, I thought, why don't I go and create it and see what comes out of it? And I think what started off as a let's give it a go kind of a feeling, about a year into it, I started to realize, wow, this is real. There are a lot of women who need this. A lot of women wrote in and say, thank you, I found a job through the portal, and thank you for having this. It gives me some hope. So that's when I realized, it's something that I think needs to keep growing and keep going. And actually, I think that's why we are where we are today. And it's increasingly talked about in not just in Singapore, I think, but in the world. What was nice for me to see was really how, because of this setup, there were other people from from countries like Vietnam, Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia. They actually wrote to me. There were other moms and said, I saw you set this up and I want to do the same. And I think that's always been the driving factor about empowering women. And to me, empowering means really giving the tools and the strategies and how you can do it. Yeah, so I think that's the core of the business, yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking to is so fundamental here. It's about reminding people that they are at choice, that they have choices in the way that they are, and really, to your words, empowering them with the confidence to really go after the things that they need. You know, this has obviously grown over the past decade, which is remarkable, and obviously we'd love to hear more about that. But what's the workplace that you imagine is possible for us all?
So for me, the way I see this is the more women speak up, the more employers know, okay, this is what you want and this is what we can offer. I always share it this way. My dream is that by the time my daughter comes out to work, and she's 11, so I have about another probably 10 years to go, and I hope I make this, but by the time she comes up to work, it no longer becomes one of these things about saying, I'm going to be a bit scared, I have to do a lot of prep work before I go in and ask for it. In an ideal world situation, it should be an option that is already made available, meaning that if you want it, our company offers it. That is my dream goal. Like firms have that as an option, right? And what's interesting for me is also recently there's been a lot of talk. I mean, last 2 years there's been a lot of talk about how you want equality in the workplace, but you also want equality in the home, meaning that men have to step up too. Men have to actually step forward and support some of the women in the caregiving duties. It could be caregiving of the kids, but sometimes it's also caregiving of the parents, for example, right? So what has been interesting for me is in the last few years, you also see this. Most firms, when they offer that flexibility to women, they also offer it to men, and men do step forward. And actually, men step forward quite quickly. They're like, oh, there's an option. Okay, I'm coming for it, right? Hopefully one day we're not having this conversation. 10 years from now, we're not saying, let's try to push for this. It shouldn't be about pushing anymore. It should be, it's part of the system, it's accepted, and it's about, it's okay for you to go out there and ask. Yeah.
So you're really pioneering the way towards this state of being for workplaces to be much more human-centered, much more humanist in the approach. I also really loved that you were talking then about what happens when we make these, things like flexible work arrangements more mainstream for women is we really fix the whole, because every individual in the workplace can then also take that on. And as to your point, that then creates an environment where, whether it's at home or in the workplace, there's a more sense of equal opportunity to really contribute. Who are you, I guess, as a human outside of this amazing entity that you've built? What are all of the things that kind of come together to make you feel whole as an individual?
This is the most interesting thing about human beings. I think sometimes we always have to take a step back. And this is who I am as well. I always take a step back and ask myself, what are the things that are important to me? What's the balance that I want in my life? And a lot of me, I realize a lot of my own personal marks of success are my children. That they're brought up well, that they become good individuals, and that one day they'll be able to do very well and succeed in life without me being around. To me, I take more pride in it. So it's interesting because on my personal social media, all my stories are always about my family, my dad, my husband, everything that's a lot more personal. And because to me, those are the things that I value and treasure, and I see as marks of success. But interestingly, sometimes I get women will come up to me and say, oh, so amazing, I see you in the papers, I see you on TV. And those things to me, they're not a mark of how I view my own success. And of course, we say, that then if one ball is not available, we always talk about juggling of the balls. If one of the balls drop and you find that you're less so, I think it's also important to recognize that is it a ball that you really can achieve? And if you cannot juggle that ball, you have to drop it. And I say this because I have met a lot of moms who say the same thing to me. For them, it's different. They spend all their time with the kids and they stop their career. And again, that one ball has dropped, right? And it's out of the game. They don't juggle that anymore. But because of that, they have this sense of like, okay, because I don't have that additional ball in there, I'm less successful. But again, you have to take a step back and ask yourself, is it fine? Are the other 4 balls going really good? And if they are, then I think to me, it's you've come some way and you are successful. That's why I find it perhaps my internal struggle as a person has always been what are the balls that are important to me right now, which are the ones that I need to juggle. And then the truth is I cannot juggle all at the same time. There will be times where I have to put one aside for a while and I come back. And there are times where I spend less time with the kids too, just for a few weeks, for example, 2 weeks, and then because I have a huge event running and I know they're neglected, but I always remember, okay, it's all right. Once this is done, the ball comes back into the picture and we do this again. And that's how I try to manage my life, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's useful. A couple of things that you touched on there. One is this kind of redefinition around what success is actually. And I feel like this is a really relevant conversation in the context of especially the context of this pandemic that we're living through. And, I think that a lot of the gloss of what we've always put up there as what success looks like and what you have to be doing in your life is kind of starting to erode somewhat, and people are just now starting to reconnect with the simpler things in life and the things that really matter and create connection for them. So I love that idea of like, how do we redefine what success actually is? And in particular, and I would imagine that this would be important in the work that you do. For me, when I talk about, when I think about success, and the reason I use the word whole is I actually sort of rail against the concept of balance, because for me, balance infers like two things on either side of this. And actually, it's my belief personally, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that we are far more multidimensional than that it's not one or two things, that there are actually many, many things that we need in our life to feel fulfilled and to feel like we are quote unquote successful. And so this constant need to be balancing work, which is one paradigm, and everything else for me seems a little bit archaic in a way. But what's your perspective on this concept of balance, or how do you view the constant conversation around balance, in particular for females in the professional context?
I've always struggled with the word balance because so it's funny, how I always say I push for work-life balance, but what I'm talking about is my mind, the balance is never equal. And back to my point earlier on about the juggling of the balls, there are times where one ball has to be put down so you can continue to manage those four. And then when the time is ready, you bring them back again.
Right.
And it's a whole concept of you're trying to put all these things in the air and you're trying, again, that constant mix, right? But there are times when one has to be put down for a while. And I think people get very, very upset a lot of times because you keep thinking that I'll never be able to bring that ball back in again, or I've dropped it and it's gone, right? I think there is some truth to the fact that some of them you have to work a little bit harder, and there's something you can't drop. So for example, as a mother, you pretty much can never drop the ball, which is your kids, right? But the thing is, most of the time, there is always a time for you to relax on some areas. Because if you keep pushing that whole concept that I always need to be in balance, and the balance is fixed, that's when you get very, very caught up with how I need to be superstar in everything. And it doesn't work this way, right? Even when we were talking about work-life balance, to me, in my mind, that balance was always going back and forth, like a seesaw. Another thing is, I think people like to see you successfully manage work-life balance when it's in equilibrium, but it's not. There are people where career is much more important to them. Even with a family, they still see career as being part. So to me, when I see someone like that, automatically in my head, the idea of balance is this way actually. So the career portion is always heavier. And they cannot go and then say, I'm looking at someone else's balance and therefore I judge myself as being, I'm out of sync. It's not this way. Honestly, Rebecca, my biggest take on this has always been we become very preoccupied with how things should be because of our expectations of ourselves when we use some other people as a mark of what is considered balanced, what is considered successful. But if you throw that away and then you look at yourself as a person and ask yourself, what have I been good at? What am I still good at? And what are the real things that I need to work on? Then your expectations are a bit more realistic. Very often when I speak to people, the expectations are always somebody else's expectations,
Yeah, I think this is a really important point because it's this notion of understanding yourself so much so that you are interested and engaged in making sure that you and your values and your strengths, to your point, are really what's being honored, and all the shoulds and need to and all of that should not, I'm not enough of this or whatever, which is all about external validation. And that's a really big step for people to get to that place where they start to say I'm confident enough. And so what have you personally done? Like, I'd love to know about your story to really strengthen that confidence to say, actually, I'm going to just consider my own journey and what my own marker for success might look like for myself.
Okay, and I'll be very honest here because yeah, I probably have never been so frank in an interview, but I, like every other woman, there are many situations where I look at someone and I think, oh wow, she's so amazing, she does all these amazing things for the kids, or her business is so successful, she's earning so much money, or wow, she's got such creative ideas. And the first instinct, like any other person, would be like, oh, how come I'm not like that? What's wrong with me, right? And what I normally do is, and usually this happens at the end of the day, I'll be sitting there thinking or reading or doing something, and I'll start thinking about, wait, what is it that I have that, where am I on my own journey? I do journal. I actually do write down. I write down my own goals at the beginning of the year because I always tell myself, these are my goals, and technically I shouldn't, I don't want it to be influenced by someone else, right? And so sometimes when I get a little bit like, oh, I'm so useless, because I do go through that, I'm like, how compared to this person, I'm so, I cannot even do this, right? And then I look back at my goals and I say, but wait a minute. If I look back at my own goals, my own KPIs, I'm achieving them, right? And it's fine because this is my KPI. I'm not going for somebody else's KPI. I always put it that way. So I think that journaling helps, but also a lot of that self-reflection.
I like this idea of reflection, and at the same time, when you talk, and I know this of you personally anyway, but there's so much ambition and drive, and it's very clear why you've got to where you've got to, and why you've impacted all the different lives. What are the conversations that you are guiding organizations on in the here and now that you think will make a really big difference systemically?
I think right now, the last 6 months, a lot of firms are, in the past, we could look at a crystal ball and sort of say, okay, in 5 years' time, we think these are, for example, these are the career skills that are important. This is the kind of personality I would love to hire. For a lot of companies and individuals, the sense I get is people are looking into the crystal ball and it's very fuzzy because we no longer know. And when things like that happen, you can see firms being a little bit scared and women also being very scared. But I'm the message that I've been trying to push through, and I think firms are with me on this, is because things are so ambiguous, there is this need to be braver about not knowing what tomorrow is going to be. Most of us don't like ambiguity, no matter how much we can embrace it. To be very frank, I don't see many people who are like, yay, let's change every day. No, most people really want some kind of a pattern because it makes life easier. But the thing I find very interesting is ambiguity is something that is very internal because most of us have our own ways of judging things. So a bit like how we talked about earlier on, when even the whole concept of balance, you want it to be fixed. You want to be told exactly what is the right balance. I think a lot of times when women come to me and ask me, I want work-life balance, tell me, give me advice. They're trying to tell me that, hey, you should be 40% career, 60.
What's the formula?
Yeah. But the truth is, there is no fixed format. That's one thing for everyone. But interestingly, for each of us, we also don't have our own fixed ratio. It keeps changing, and the ambiguity has always been there. And the truth is, in the next 3 to 4 years, I think a lot of things will be ambiguous for a very long time, meaning that we're going to try and it may or may not work, and you have to be ready with that. That's one thing. Second thing I think that is being talked about a lot is this whole idea of, to your point earlier on about how people are looking more for purpose in their jobs and in their day-to-day lives. I think what might help is to really always take a few steps back and say, hey, how can I as an individual do this? But I think firms are also going along that path, which is why we get more and more firms, even during the pandemic, actually come forward and say, hey, instead of just hiring, let's make a difference when we're hiring. So some are talking about sustainability, obviously, but there are also others that are saying, let's look at being more fair to different marginalized groups in society. And I never saw this before, but it's almost like it's a joke I had the other day, but I think it's true. We are developing our conscience again, and the firms are also developing their conscience again. Interestingly, during a pandemic, it all pulls out.
It's funny, isn't it? Just to jump in here, it's funny, isn't it, how it takes something for both individuals and organizations to say, stop, think about what do you really want? And you use the word, which I love, consciousness. Like, how can we be more conscious of who we really are at our core, both as individuals, for teams, for businesses, for leaders of governments, the world over?
I've always believed that as human beings, we all have insecurities. We all have. If we don't try to address the insecurities, it gets passed on to the people around us, either to the kids that we love. I know a lot of people will parent kids in a way where it's to hide our insecurity. So what do I mean by that? I know a lot of mothers who share with me, I want my children to be this successful. I want them to be this and that. And sometimes I ask the question, is it you who wants to be that? Or is it Jason who wants to be that? And that's one. And I think also another thing is it's the same with work. Sometimes we have a lot of things we're not good at, and it takes a lot for us to admit to ourselves first that we're not good at that, and not try to cover it up. Once we've dealt with that, this is an interesting thing. A lot of times when we say we're not good, the truth is, yeah, we're not good at some things. But when you ask people, what are you not good at? They don't really want to tell you, or they don't really want to admit it. So I find it's an interesting thing, because you can only be confident and positive when you really know where your real challenge is. Because once you know where your real insecurity, challenge, fear is, then you can solve it, or at least you can work towards solving it, right? And then thereafter, you can focus on what's positive about you. Does that make sense?
It does. I actually have a slightly divergent perspective on this, which is more like, so do you know Gallup's work, Strengthsfinder? Yeah, so I sort of more subscribe to individuals really understanding who they are, what they're about, their value systems, and then also understanding their strengths and continuously working on their strengths. I think it's useful to be aware of areas that you want to develop in that might serve you both in your role or whatever it is. But, I think that in line with that thinking around strengths, I think there's something to be gained from us really focusing on the areas that light us up, that make us feel alive. So that's kind of my take on it. But what I'm hearing you say, which I do agree with, which is around taking time to build your self-awareness, because the more self-aware you are, the more you're going to show up fully as who you are, and that has a big impact. That's when authenticity shines through.
I mean, I always tell you this, right? I do not know how else to be different, but I value that in people a lot, and I think most people do. That's the interesting thing. Over the years, I've come to realize that even the most I've met ministers, prime ministers from the work I do, and all that. But people always value someone who's very authentic, and I think most of us we should be proud of who we are. Good or bad, we are human, right? That's my point about how, like, to your point about the strengths, I agree, but also I come with weaknesses, and it's okay,
Oh yeah, humans, we are innately flawed. We're designed flawed. Yeah.
And it's fine. I find that sometimes we struggle to recognize that it's okay. Like, I know my weaknesses very well. I have tons of them, and we all know it, right? And sometimes I don't. I find that if I try to shy away from it, it doesn't solve my problem. Like the detail oriented is a good example. My colleagues know I'm not good with small details. And if I try to hide that as a leader, it's not going to work for me. I'm just end up slowing down the project and doing. So sometimes I tell them, you know me, I'm not good with details. And they go, yep. And I say, so please help me out. And because of that, that's how we work very well as a team. We know exactly details. Please don't ask her, because you end up doing extra 30 minutes of work. That's what they will tell me. Sometimes they'll joke about it in front of me and behind my back. They'll say, you give it to Sher-Li, don't, let's do it ourselves. And that's how we save each other and make each other better. I genuinely believe in that.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you sharing these stories and examples as well. So just a couple more questions. One is really, what is the kind of life mantra that you live by?
I suppose that concept about what I shared with you about going into something and trying to give 100%, even if it only benefits one person. So for me, most things, if I can, I really try to go in there and do the best I can. I know people say that's very cliche, but especially with things I know is going to be important, I try my best. Some days I fall short because like I said, I can't say no. So I go and say yes, 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 yes. And next thing I know, I'm like, oh, I cannot cope. I want very much to know that if possible, everything I go into has to have some purpose. And again, it's this point of I don't have to create the purpose. Most things we do have a purpose, but really thinking through what is it that's helping, what is the purpose of doing this, and why am I doing this act, and who's going to benefit from it. It could be me, but there must be something good out of it, even out of something bad. Every time something is bad, that's one belief. And my other belief, very strong, I wouldn't say it's a mantra, but it's something I strongly subscribe to. It's also something that I share very much with my husband. When the crisis hit, I said, look, my belief system is that there's no job beneath anyone. Every job is respectable. Everyone deserves respect. And I think that's the basic belief system I have. It's how I bring up my kids as well. I say, whatever choice you make, whatever decision you make, no one is beneath you. No job is beneath you. I live by this belief to the things I do. Usually, if I'm very curt to someone, it's not because I look down on them. It's because they're very offensive and I have to back off, right? So sometimes, people will say things like, we for example, we've had cases where people write in and they say, we requested for a lot of help, but you all didn't give us much help. I'll always say to them the same thing. We don't look down on anyone. We don't see anyone as beneath. Because sometimes people ask me, is it because I'm older? I say, no. It's because what you've asked for, and we've told you very clearly, we cannot do. So we've had people, for example, writing in to ask for, can you give us a parenting tips, right? We're not a parenting tip organization, right? But I think, again, to this point about how if you see everyone as an equal, or at least deserving of a respect, you should see the beauty in people.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing to pass on to children, and if more people believed that everybody was worthy, I think the world would be an infinitely.
I think so. But it's a very sometimes I think it's to people they feel it's very airy-fairy, but it's not. If you put that as your moral compass, then it all makes sense, right?
No, I think it's lovely. What are some final thoughts that you want to leave people with? What is some messages that you want to spread out in the world?
I think if you're a woman, I want you to know that you have a right to speak up. You have a right to embrace who you are. I think that if you're a mom, even more so, every day that you live is meaningful as a mom. I think I genuinely think it's a blessing to be a mother. Because we always talk about legacy, right? You have legacy already right next to you. Obviously, sometimes the legacy is screaming at you and throwing a tantrum, but it doesn't matter. It's still a legacy. I think you have to believe in that, because a lot of women really, really don't believe in your own self-value. And interestingly, I think over the years, I'm starting to realize sometimes men as well. There's a big difference between your ego and your internal self-esteem. And I think it's very important to recognize deep down inside that you are worth something, and you're worth somebody's effort and time on you. Importantly, for women too, I think sometimes not to confuse what's outside, which is the ego, that whole idea of looking great. But it's not that, it's the inside. Because if your inside is scared and really afraid and not recognizing your own value, it will always show up in some other way. So always have that inner belief, inner conversation. You don't have to tell the world that you're great. You just have to tell yourself and know yourself that you are good.
I feel like that's a perfect place to end our conversation. Never more important words to hear, just to listen to and have that quiet inner belief. Thank you so much, Sher-Li, for your wisdom and for your thoughts today. It's been lovely speaking to you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of Not Just Anything for Women Who Want It Whole. If you enjoyed our discussion, be sure to subscribe to our weekly podcast and leave us a review. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here with us, and we look forward to having you join again. And remember, be brave, be whole, be you.